Finished training for the day? Time to fight post-workout fatigue with Core Power Protein Shakes. They're packed with 26 grams of high-quality protein to build muscle and electrolytes to help hydrate. The nutrition you need to help your body replenish, rebuild, and repair post-workout so you can power on to the next one. Champion your recovery with Core Power. Visit corepower.com to learn more.
The family that vacations together stays together. At least, that was the plan. Except now, the dastardly desk clerk is saying he can't confirm your connecting rooms.
Wait, what?
That's right, ma'am. You have rooms 201 and 709.
No, we cannot be 5 floors away from our kids.
The doors have double locks. They'll be fine.
When you want connecting rooms confirmed before you arrive, it matters where you stay.
Welcome to Hilton. I see your connecting rooms are already confirmed.
Hilton, for the stay.
This episode is brought to you by Indeed. When your computer breaks, you don't wait for it to magically start working again. You fix the problem. So why wait to hire the people your company desperately needs? Use Indeed's sponsored jobs to hire top talent fast. And even better, you only pay for results. There's no need to wait. Speed up your hiring with a $75 sponsored job credit at Indeed.com/podcast. Terms and conditions apply.
Hi, I'm Jac.
And I'm Amy.
And we're the hosts of BookTok for BookTok with Jac and Amy, a podcast that deep dives into the writings of your favorite romances and romantasy novels.
Thank you to In Bloom Bookery for inviting us to be today's moderators. We are so excited to join you all with 3 amazing authors, Amanda Sellet, Mazey Eddings, and Zen Cho.
Amanda Sellet is a former journalist and author of rom-coms for teens and adults. She is fond of silly jokes, large bodies of water, desserts at least once a day, and a good story. Today we're here to discuss her latest novel, The Odds of Getting Even. You can find her at her website, amandasellet.com, or on Instagram at AmandaJSellet.
Mazey Eddings is a best-selling author, dentist, and, most importantly, stage mom to her cats. She's made it her personal mission to destigmatize mental health issues and write love stories for every brain, including her latest second chance romance, Well, Actually. You can find her at her website, MazeyEddings.com, on Instagram at Mazey Eddings, and on TikTok at FoxyGrandpa27.
Zen Cho is a UK-based Malaysian author of fantasy and romance. She writes books about powerful women, gentle men, dragon dandies, useless bandits, bossy Asian aunties, and more, and is the winner of many prestigious awards for her writing. Her latest romance, Behind Frenemy Lines, is her latest addition to her Love in London series. You can find her at her website, zencho.org, and on Instagram, Zenaldehyde.
Zenaldehyde, so it's carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, so CHO.
I love that so much.
Well, before we jump into questions, Amanda, Mazey, Zen, do you want to take turns talking about each of your books, giving the audience maybe hasn't read it yet a quick synopsis? Amanda, why don't you go first?
Alphabetical order, first names.
A to Z. I love it. Okay, so my newest book is called The Odds of Getting Even, and it is a retelling of a classic screwball comedy, The Lady Eve, from the 1940s. Oh, it's about kind of an outspoken, brash woman who meets this very shy snake scientist on vacation, and they fall head over heels for each other, but they are both keeping secrets, and so things fall apart, and obviously she has to do revenge, and they meet again at this big kind of hoedown celebration in the wilds of South Dakota, and they have to figure their, bleep out.
I'm Mazey Eddings, and I'm the author of Well, Actually. That is tough. Well, Actually is essentially, at its core, it's just a woman that's hot and mean and a guy that really likes that about her. But it stars Eva Kitt, who is a journalist doing fluff pieces, interviewing celebrities over hot dogs, and kind of hating her life. And it's not the hard-hitting journalism career that she once wanted and envisioned for herself. And one night she has a bit too much Prosecco while doom scrolling, and she sees her ex-situationship from college who ghosted her pop up on her TikTok feed. And, he's built this huge platform and following about detoxifying masculinity and ways to be a good partner. And so she does what any reasonable and self-respecting woman does. She stitches the video and calls him out for she calls him out for being just like a little fucker and spills a lot of dirty laundry, and it goes viral. And because it takes off so much, her work is like, you need to capitalize on this and do a live stream with him, blah, blah, blah. And at their reunion, he makes her a deal. He's like, give me 6 dates to prove that I am not the little fucker that you once knew and that I've changed and grown and all this stuff. And so she agrees because, again, she wants this promotion. Her work's telling her she essentially has to do it. And old feelings start to resurface along the way.
So my newest novel is called Behind Frenemy Lines, which my editor came up with. It's set in a London law firm, very like the one that I worked at for 11 years. And it's about Priya Rajsekar, who has just come to this new firm following her boss, who's a partner going through a very gnarly divorce. And she finds out she's been assigned to the same office as her longtime work nemesis, Charles Goh, who somehow seems to be there every time she has some sort of embarrassing work mishap. And having just found this out, her boss then starts hitting on her. So they cook up a plan where she will pretend to be dating Charles to keep her boss off her back. And obviously, they both catch feelings along the way.
Love a fake romance. Well, all of these sound like so much fun. And what we love about these books is that you all balance laugh out loud moments with heartfelt romance. So one of our questions for you is, how do you decide when to lean into comedy versus vulnerability in your storytelling? Unless someone feels strongly otherwise. Why don't we go in reverse order this time? We'll do Z to A.
Yeah, I think for me, there's never a kind of situation in life that is so dark that there's not something kind of funny about it, because I think people generally are funny. And I suppose it kind of comes out quite naturally. Like, even when I'm writing something I think is quite serious, most of the time they'll sort of come out with a joke or 3 in it. So, and I think with Behind Frenemy Lines, firstly, I wanted it to be quite rooted, because I think depictions of the law, understandably in media, often are quite glamorized, or they're kind of high stakes and it's all very dramatic. And I just thought it'd be kind of funny to show the day-to-day of, like, oh God, I've got an office of somebody who's really annoying, and they're eating with something really smelly at their desk, or they never remember to put their headphones on when they were on a Teams call. And that kind of everyday thing I find quite amusing. And I think it can be really funny in fiction. I think the other thing as well is, I think Charles particularly, first-person POV, which I've never done before, but I wanted them to have very distinctive voices. And Charles, who's the male lead, I think sees the world in quite a funny way, although he's not necessarily aware of that. So I think that just kind of came in quite naturally.
Yeah, I agree with Zen on that. To me, some of like my funniest, like I treat my like weekly therapy sessions as like stand-up comedy hour. And I think that there's so much, and maybe it's the trauma, but I think that there's so much humor in like those dark moments too. And one of my favorite things is like, at least personally, when I'm having like a really big emotional moment or, crying, and then I kind of like look around and I'm like, well, thank God nobody overreacted, right? Like, 'cause emotions are so funny and so interesting. And I also think that there's, something to be said about life never being particularly serious, right? Like, you can be having this huge argument or like, yeah, a very breakdown type of moment, and then your cat walks up and like pukes on your carpet, and like, or, like disasters, like life doesn't wait for you to like have the moment, have the big scene. And I think that that's really fun to look at in comedy and romantic comedy too, because I think, what's so special about romance in general is you see these characters going through so many, quiet moments of feelings, but also very grand ones. And so to play on that dichotomy between laughter and like devastation is really fun, and I think actually more true to life than we would think. And I also just can't take anything seriously personally, so I think that also plays a part.
Yeah, I'm also on Team Clown. Like, it's very hard for me. I have to remind myself. I'm like, oh, yes, humans have emotions, let me be sure and filter that in. But also just, I love the sneak attack, like both with comedy and with emotion. And so I think it's it's fun to kind of set up an expectation and like, here we are. Oh yeah, I know exactly what mood this scene is in. I know what's happening. And then you slide something in, and it's like, I had a really amazing grilled cheese sandwich, not long ago when I was at a dairy in Massachusetts. Shout out Highland Dairy Farm. And what was so exceptional about it was that you're eating this creamy sandwich. It's kind of fried, it's like, I know what a grilled cheese sandwich is. And then you get this hint of this spiced pear jam, and you're just like, oh, that's so piquant. Like my taste buds are like so awakened right now. And I experience it in a new and surprising way. Whereas had I been coming at that scene with like, this is pure emotion and, we're totally sincere and earnest this whole time. And it would lose some of the surprise of it and the effectiveness of it. And I think that's both because I am probably a reserved person, writing this, and because in the case of this book, I have characters who don't trust themselves and don't trust their own perceptions and feelings. And so they are kind of caging that and second guessing themselves and trying to hide it. So they're much more comfortable being covert and like, here's my stealth declaration. Hopefully you didn't even notice it happening.
I love that because I think as writers, or especially fledgling writers, it's so easy to fall into this, got to take it seriously. I'm writing a serious book. But nothing in life is really, at least in my life, is that serious. And so I love that life is unexpected. So let's throw unexpected crap into the scene or the story as well.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the funniest nights of my life was Amy in the ER. Story for another time. Let's shift a little bit over to second chance romances. I love a second chance romance, mainly because I love men groveling. So, that's the truth of it all. But what do you think is so universally appealing about second chance love stories? And how do you approach writing them in a way that feels different? How about we mix things up and start with Mazey, then Amanda, then Zen?
I've always loved second chance, but it wasn't until I wrote one that I found out it's actually extremely controversial. Like, people hate this trope. It, like, will not read a second chance. So I've actually mainly seen dislike for it. So I'm glad to hear that you feel like it's universally appealing, because I agree, where I'm like, I love nothing more than a man just having to like eat crow and acknowledge all the screw ups and things like that. But I think it's interesting too because it creates so much, like, such a juicy diving in point too, where there's so many different ways that you can take it in romance, where you're kind of unfurling like what actually happened, or you come to it having all this knowledge, and then it's kind of this understanding of how things are going to change. Yeah, so I don't know. To me, what's appealing about it as well is I love to see what they've hung on to from like that past relationship, good, bad, or just like these tiny moments and things that they've like carried through all this time. And I think it really sets up very nicely for pining and just a yearning. And what I tried to do, so kind of opposite of Zen, I historically write two points of view, and I've just recently switched from third to first, but this was my first book where it was first point of view and only Eva, my female main character's perspective. And that was tricky to me, but I thought that it added a lot of value because we didn't know, like, and it wouldn't have worked if I had written the hero, or Riley, the hero's point of view, because it would have just been like, I heart Eva every chapter and things like that. But I think to me that added this level of like, what are his motives, like this ambiguity to it, and can we trust him and things like that.
I also didn't know it was controversial, and I'm getting like definitely hammered much more on the miscommunication trope. So I barely even noticed people being upset about the second chance romance. But on a really pragmatic level, I think as writers, like, second chance is great because it gives you that built-in. You don't have to deal with the insta love, right? Especially if you're working in a compressed time frame for the story on the page. It's like, okay, these characters already have this history, they have this connection, they have this baggage, all of that you can draw on, and so that's fun. But on the more emotional side, I think about it like it's like nostalgia, it evokes this moment in your past. It's like hearing a song that was popular when you were in high school or when you were in middle school or something like that. And suddenly you're there and you're remembering like, oh, the quality of the light, and this is how the air felt, and this is how I felt, and these were my hopes and my dreams. It's like I remember when my daughter started middle school, like I got out my yearbooks from that era and we were looking through it. And I was like, I don't remember that. Anyway, and you see like a name and you're just like that name in your mind, like it's coming like with a reverb effect. You're like, Brent Bixby. And you're like, I was like, wait, would a normal person seeing that name like have any kind of deep association with this? And, probably not, right? Although maybe in that case, because that is a super preppy, like, Laxbro name. But anyway, it instantly evokes an emotional state. And so that I find like a really useful shorthand for it. And I guess I'm really interested in memory and those feelings of nostalgia and kind of like who was the main character in the past when that happened and how have they changed and like what is the distance between back then and now. And that's kind of fun. I mean, it's like going to grown-up prom or something.
Yeah, I think Amanda made a really good point about kind of the pragmatic use of a second chance romance, where it's almost like a shortcut to that kind of intensity of the relationship between the two leads. Although you've got to sell it as the author, obviously, because the readers don't know them. But if you can sell kind of characters who've got like 10 years or whatever history, that kind of adds a lot of weight to each of their interactions and makes everything more meaningful because it comes with all this meaning from their past. Behind Frenemy Lines isn't particularly a second chance romance, I don't think, because they basically meet as professional peers and have it's a fairly like distant relationship. It's just unfortunate because basically every time Kriya falls on her face, Charles happens to be there, and then he spills coffee in her important client meetings, that kind of thing. But I think one thing a second chance romance does, and in the Friend Zone experiment, my first rom-com was a second chance romance where they met at university, kind of broke up, and then meet again kind of 10 years later. I think one thing that Behind Frenemy Lines has, which in a way operates in the same way, is that they have the same working milieu, so they have the same language in a way. You have kind of common understanding of the world and viewpoint and kind of reference points because they're both lawyers working in London and very similar sorts of firms. They would have been trained in a very similar way. And I think a second chance romance kind of gives you that kind of common vocabulary almost between those characters as something they share. The other thing about second chance romance is I don't really know why this is the case, and you can kind of make big generalizations about it, which I will do. But the Friend Zone experiment, I started writing. I'm now working on a fantasy. I'm kind of best known for my fantasy. But Friend Zone experiment and Behind Frenemy Lines are both contemporary romances set in London, no magic at all. And part of the reason why I started writing Friend Zone experiment, which was a real surprise to me, was I got into K-dramas. And I really enjoyed kind of, the way K-drama does romance. But one thing about a K-drama, which does drive me wild, is that if the leads knew each other in childhood, they're going to end up together. So if you're kind of rooting for another love interest, but then you find out they didn't know each other in childhood, whereas like, the female lead did know that like this other guy in childhood, you're like, oh, the one that was her childhood friend is going to win. And this really annoys me, but because sometimes like the other guy is better, obviously better. But I do think there's a thing about kind of, there's an East Asian thing about yuanfen, which in Chinese, I don't know what the Korean equivalent is, but I'm sure there's an equivalent word, which basically means like fate, but fate specifically in the connection, in the sense of your connection with another person. So it's kind of a destined connection. Actually, you have yuanfen with everyone, but some of it is kind of weak, right? Like your yuanfen with like the guy that you buy your coffee from is going to be, well, I mean, depends on what kind of romance you're in, but it's generally going to be quite a lot weaker than say you're in fun with the person you're going to marry. So I think there's just this idea of like, I meet this person again and again in my life and I have this like deep connection with them. And that means I'm gonna end up with them. And there's something like deeply romantic about, like, it really plugs into something in the kind of East Asian psyche.
So true. I grew up in China, so I am very familiar with that narrative. And I'm like, yeah, you're right. That is why I love all of those types of stories. All right. So for our next question, one thing I love about rom-coms, I think that maybe is more obvious than some romanticities, are how flawed the characters are because they're real people in real life situations. So for each of your stories, what was one maybe imperfection or flaw that you deliberately gave either your male or female lead that you felt helped ground them and make them more real for your audience? Amanda, why don't we start with you?
So in the case of Jean, and mine is also dual POV, but I feel like Jean is the sort of the dominant character, both in personality and in page time and sort of whose story we're following. But she is not entirely honest with herself and therefore not with other people. And not necessarily on a conscious level, but like she's a little dishonest with herself about her own motivations. And so, for example, like if I were Jean's therapist and I sat her down and I would be like, so you say that you need to go track this guy down for revenge purposes. It's like, have you considered like unpacking that a little bit and figuring out that maybe your actual motivation is that you're still totally in love with him? You have a sad feeling because he hurt your feelings, and that you're calling that revenge because that's what feels safe to you, because that's the powerful place. That's how you want to see yourself. That's how you want the world to see you. And it's not necessarily a complete picture. So I would say that, yeah, Jean's flaw, and one that I can relate to, is that she doesn't always tell people the whole story about herself, including herself.
Maisie, why don't you go next?
For me, it's hard because so much of like my writing process is very much discovery, and so I'm like going through it, and they feel like very fully formed people that I'm digging away at and getting to know. And so sometimes things don't feel as intentional, where I'm like, this is their flaw, or this is what, I'm gonna have them overcome, or things like that. With Eva, she's very much falls into the unlikable woman trope, or not trope, I mean just kind of like internalized misogyny that we have for women when we're looking at romance and media in general. And to me, she's not unlikable at all. Like, she's the person that I would want to hang out with the most. And yeah, that wasn't something that I felt like she needed to overcome. If anything, I was like, yeah, get meaner. And with Riley, I feel like he was actually the character that I spent a lot of time. And again, it wasn't a flaw so much as a wound. And I think it's easy for us as people to look at our wounds as flaws that we have to overcome. And I try to keep those kind of separate when looking at the characters. But for him, so much of his like past very toxic behavior came from a lot of internalized biphobia that he had, and this lack of reckoning and self-identifying as being bisexual. And for me, like that, I just felt like that was a really important avenue to really explore with him, because I think there's a ton of bi-erasure. I think that there's kind of difficulty in knowing where you fit, within the queer community, especially if you're in a, hetero presenting relationship, blah, blah, blah. And then I think bisexual men have a lot of stigma attached to it too, where you have heterosexual women that are, throw out really harsh, criticism and things at bisexual men. And then you have gay men that think that bisexual men are just confused, and like all these different elements. And I think, again, this isn't a flaw. It was something that I just wanted to see him reckon with and realize how, so much of his internalizing that and unwillingness to unpack that led to a lot of his toxic behavior in the past. That just felt really important to explore in the story. And I think it did kind of ground him in reality too, where he acknowledges that he was awful in the past. And then, it was like, but this is what I'm doing to change, or like acknowledge and kind of have a reckoning with himself and the wrongs that he's done in the past.
Yeah, I find writing romance really interesting because you have to kind of start with a part, but then you want the readers to root for them to be in a relationship, but they have to kind of keep them apart for the duration of a book. And although in real life, there are lots of reasons why people might have issues in their relationships, or, with people they're dating or people they're attracted to. Quite a lot of those issues would probably give the readers the ick. Like, do you know what I mean? Like, it's like, oh, he's kind of dismissive. Avoid it. Like, she's kind of anxiously attached. It's just like, it becomes a bit too much like when you're sitting there listening to your friend talk about her situationship, and you're just like, oh God, not this again. So to kind of craft that like distance, but then like still have them seem like a really good match and like someone, like people you want to see together, I think it's really challenging. In this book, I suppose the kind of features that I used, and this does include the answer to your question, I'm not just rambling unconnectedly. But one of the features, obviously, is they meet at work, which I think kind of you start out with your work persona on, right? And you're in a different setting. You're not necessarily yourself. And they also have a kind of unfortunate kind of history of, as I previously mentioned, him spilling coffee on her and so on. One of the other aspects is Charles in particular is profoundly socially awkward, like very socially awkward, and he's kind of unintentionally rude to her a few times. And I hope I sell it because you get to see in his point of view as well. I would say it's it's not explicit in the book, but it's kind of obvious enough that multiple readers have picked up on it. He's kind of a low-key autistic, basically, and you can see from his mindset he's not intending to be rude, but he does end up being kind of rude sometimes, and you can see how that would put off like someone who was sharing an office with him and expecting him to observe basically standard norms of professional behavior. So I guess that was it's a kind of classic Darcy style flaw, where if you read Darcy in Pride and Prejudice as being awkward, you could read him as instead having a great deal of class prejudice, or but he's popularly read, I think, as being awkward.
We love Darcy. He has a touch of the tism. We all know it. It's like we love our boy. So I love talking a little bit more about, you're talking about how the characters bring that authenticity and by making them flawed, but they're not flawed. Like, we're just all humans. I want to take a little bit more of that conversation in going into this concept of romantic escapism versus reality or realism. And readers tend to turn to rom-coms both for escape and for stories that feel grounded. How do you balance writing interactions that are sometimes they don't feel grounded? They feel so magical, right? Like there are these fun, swoon-worthy moments, but they also feel authentic to modern relationships. I don't read any rom-coms and think like this would never, billionaires will see, but there's moments where I'm like, no, like this is swoon worthy. And then you experience it in real life and you're like, yeah, that actually exists. So how do you find that balance? Okay, we'll start with Amanda, Mazey, then Zen.
This is the part of the story where the Fae magic pauses for capitalism.
I am so excited to enter my loafer era with my Uptown loafer from Vionic. Literally, this is every girl's autumn dream shoe.
I've invested in Vionic's Winnie sneaker, which is the perfect timeless item that you can wear with your streetwear, but I also wear it going to the office.
Every time I Google what the cool girl sneaker is, the Walk Slim Glide is always the first one that pops up. I think I might actually have to get that one next.
The shopping experience is so easy. The pictures online are so great. You know exactly what you're getting into. And honestly, I have to use the size guide, and the size guide was spot on.
My Vionic Uptown loafer might be the most comfortable pair of shoes I own, which means I will be walking more this fall.
With my Winnie sneakers, they are so easy to wear all day. I don't struggle with foot pain the way that I do in other shoes.
And you in particular, if you have a bad shoe, it ruins your entire body.
And Jack knows it.
I have to live with those complaints. But you know what I haven't been hearing? Any complaints with Vionic.
They even offer a 30-day guarantee. Wear them, love them, or return them for a full refund within 30 days.
I am keeping those shoes. I will be ordering 5 more, please.
100%. Use code BookTok at checkout for 15% off your entire order at vionicshoes.com when you log into your account.
It's a one-time use only, so make sure you head over to vionicshoes.com and use BookTalk, BookTalk, at checkout for 15% off your entire order.
Vionic Shoes, wearable well-being for your feet.
AG1 Next Gen is a daily health drink clinically shown to support gut health and fill in common nutrient gaps.
What I love about AG1 is the live probiotics that are in the drink in addition to the 75 plus minerals and vitamins. I've tried the probiotic pills and it just doesn't work for me.
You are a probiotic girl.
I try so hard.
My favorite part about AG1 Next Gen is the fact that they have multiple gold standard clinical trials. In an industry where not everyone invests heavily on research, AG1 Next Gen goes to great lengths to continually invest in rigorous peer-reviewed clinical trials.
Not only does AG1 support gut health, it also boosts energy, provides daily nutrients, and supports your immune system. Head to drinkag1.com/booktalk to get a free welcome kit, including a bottle of vitamin D and free AG1 travel packs when you first subscribe.
That's drinkag1.com/booktalk, BookTalk. One of the things I really wish is that as a kid, I was taught healthy money habits. And luckily with Acorns Early, you can teach your kids those healthy habits.
Acorns Early is the smart debit card and money app that grows kids' money skills as they grow up. Start with the In-Chore Apps tracker and teach your kids the value of $1. Also, the satisfaction of crossing off a chore.
Then you let your kids start their own savings goals, the amount of toys I would have bought myself as a child if I had this.
Kids can spend what they've earned with their own customizable debit card, giving them that extra sense of independence.
I think giving kids that level of independence is so important.
I completely agree. Because if they don't learn it now, they're going to have to learn it with higher stakes later in life, which my parents didn't do with me. Plus, with Acorns Early's spending limits and real-time spend notifications, parents always stay in control.
This is honestly one of the most genius apps, and I can't wait to be able to use it with my kids.
I wish I had kids just so I could use this.
You're going to make sure my kids are going to use this.
That's right. Ready to teach your kids the smart way to earn, save, and spend?
Get your first month on us when you head to acornsearly.com/booktalk or download the Acorns Early app.
That's 1 month free when you sign up at acornsearly.com/booktalk. BOOKTALK.
Acorns Early Card is issued by Community Federal Savings Bank. Member FDIC. Pursuant to license by MasterCard International. Free trial for new subscribers only. Subscription fee starting from $5 per month unless canceled. Terms apply at acornsearly.com/early terms.
Wish you could become a morning person? You know the type, up before the sun, early morning runs, first one to the office with donuts and a smile. How do they do it? Easy. With the new Galaxy Watch 8, sleep tracking and personalized insights from Samsung Health help you improve so you can wake up to a whole new you. One who, dare I say it, skips the snooze? It's possible. Train your sleep with Galaxy Watch 8. Learn more at Samsung.com. Requires compatible Samsung Galaxy phone, Samsung Health app, and Samsung account.
Yeah, I mean, I also go to rom-coms for escapism. And so I think like there are certain elements, and in particular in this book and the book that preceded it, Hate to Fake It to You, like the setting is very escapist. And it's like, I want it to feel like a vacation on the page. And so you're in this kind of luxurious setting. Maybe there are celebrities there and the careers are aspirational. And so there are all these elements of it. And they're eating this amazing, perfect food, but they never have to exercise. And, you know, it's just like all the hot people are together. It's like Love Island. But to keep that from like totally leaving the realm of reality, to feel some connection to it, then yeah, it's the emotional side. And so even if we haven't been in those specific circumstances, we have experienced the emotions or the feelings, you know, that feeling of vulnerability, that feeling of insecurity, that feeling of like, I'm not sure I fit in, I'm feeling judged, I'm judging myself, you know, so just grabbing something that is sort of universal and letting that filter in, you know, as sort of a backing track, like behind what might be this glossier exterior of like, okay, here's this perfect aspirational life where no one has ever had a pimple and there is no such thing as a bad hair day, you know, or maybe there is, but it's only in a comedic way. But yeah, so it's just grounding it a little bit in some emotion.
Yeah, this is a tough question. And because I think like so much of why I write is to, I don't know, and maybe I'm not the norm with this, but to kind of escape my own reality or like play and explore what other people would do in different situations and things like that. And so I guess in a lot of ways when I sit down to write, it's kind of how I figure out how I feel about things in general, or yeah, my own thoughts and feelings on stuff, but through the lens of watching other people play those things out. I think romantically, the bar is in hell for kind of what a lot of women expect or require, or want, or need in a relationship with men. And so I think that that's an interesting thing to explore as well, where it's like it feels escapist, but should it? You know, like, or is this really just kind of like what we should expect from partners? And I also think that there's so much swooniness, and I like the exploring of a really intimate or vulnerable or swoony moment where it's very much just like slice of life. It's all those quiet times, like, you know, in the morning having coffee together. And well, actually, they have to go on a series of dates where Riley's trying to prove himself. And the first date that he plans is so ridiculously over the top and, you know, and drama. And there's so many elements to it. And it was supposed to kind of be this foil or this look at like, you don't have to go into this, escapism or over the top, out of this world sort of presentation to show that you like somebody. It's just about kind of understanding them as a person and doing those quiet things and finding it in those quiet moments. And I think that's where the most intimacy is created. And I think that that's the value of love and romance, both in the genre and in the real world, where it makes the very mundane things seem so special and so exciting. And yeah, just like, and like a special treat to have coffee with a partner or, to have somebody cook dinner for you. Like, that's very real. And we can't lose sight of that kind of magic that we can get in our real life.
Yeah, I think what I like about romance, both reading and writing it, is the kind of focus on character and interiority. And I think because for genre romance, it's already kind of inherently escapist in that a reader picking up knows that they're going to get a happy ending or a kind of happy for now. And so all the struggles they kind of know is going to be okay at the end, which you don't necessarily get with every genre. So in that sense, you've already got the escapism baked in, and you've got to honor that. Obviously, the conventions have to kind of be there. But I think to then make it feel kind of sufficiently realistic or rooted, I think, as Amanda says, in the emotion, as Mazey says, in the kind of quiet moments. For me, I always kind of focus on writing characters where I feel like I know them, like, oh, they might be people I know. And I think if a character starts acting in a way where you're like, someone wouldn't act like that in real life, or it's not, I can't really buy it, and just making them do that for the plot, that's when you kind of need to backtrack as a writer and kind of work out what's going on. And I think if you write something where it's like, these are people that I could kind of meet in real life, then that's going to have that realism and that kind of weight to it, I think.
Thank you all. So for our next question, kind of shifting gears a little bit, you each write your rom-coms from a slightly different angle, with different premises, some second chance, some not. In this moment, how do you see your work fitting into the bigger rom-com genre right now? I was just thinking about the whole viral video and podcast aspect. I'm like, it's so interesting how what I love about rom-com is it's of this moment, whereas maybe the great American novel tries to be timeless, but that doesn't mean a rom-com isn't a great American novel. I'm curious how you see your work fitting into the space right now. And I apologize, Zen, you're not in America, you're in the UK, but it's still relevant. Zen, why don't you go first?
Yeah, I guess behind Frenemy Lines is a legal romance, which is kind of a classic subgenre, isn't it? I suppose what's unusual about it is that I don't think there have been that many romances set in kind of, city law firms, so the City of London specifically. Interestingly, actually, speaking of kind of more literary novels, while I was writing it, I was reading a very good book called Jaded by Ella Lee, which is a really kind of, honestly, quite grim look at the experiences of a kind of young female mixed race lawyer who is sexually assaulted while she's kind of working at a very similar firm. And it's, I think, drawn quite heavily from the experiences of the author. And I was reading it while writing my book and sort of feeling like my book's kind of the sunshine version and this is the kind of dark side. And actually both sides are true in a way, because actually my book is quite heavily based on my own experiences. And I never had a kind of, and actually, if anything, I had better experiences than the main character of my book, because I was never sexually harassed myself, whereas Kriya is sexually harassed by her boss. I suppose that's one aspect, which is that it's kind of one depiction of, I suppose, a kind of moment in time in the UK, and I'm sure it's paralleled across the world, where, in earlier generations, you wouldn't have had that many female Asian lawyers in city law firms to kind of write about their experiences. So it's quite a recent artifact in a way, because it's a relatively new experience to be as kind of broad, as kind of common as it now is. The other thing I was thinking about when you're talking about how do you see your work kind of fitting in is, I think, again, thinking about the UK context specifically, I think obviously the Asian American community is very established and one that's very large in kind of relative terms. I would say the kind of what's now called the East and Southeast Asian community of the UK is at a much earlier stage in terms of self-awareness. There's very much a strong kind of a growing East and Southeast Asian movement here in the UK, and actually is kind of born post-COVID. A lot of organizing happened around COVID because of all the kind of anti-East and Southeast Asian sentiment. In the UK, the kind of South Asian community has always been more established, kind of larger. And so actually, I mean, you guys probably know this, but like when you say Asian in the UK, generally that means South Asian, which is why this kind of rather clunky term East and Southeast Asian kind of came about. I mean, effectively, it's meant to replace Oriental, which is the word that people used to use. I definitely see behind Frenemy Lines as being in that context, as being part of that kind of growing movement and growth of a self-aware East and Southeast Asian British community. I think it probably is the first British East and Southeast Asian romance, that's been traditionally published.
I think that there, to your point about like the great American novel or, trying to the conversations that we have about like what belongs in a story, in a book, in a novel. I do see like a lot of discourse that happens around pop culture references and even a discussion on how it ages a book and things like that. And I understand the point and the reasoning behind leaving them out or trying to make something feel more universally, more universal or a bit more timeless or things like that. I at least personally feel like there's value in kind of leaning into of the moment pop culture references and what that means like as a society and as a culture, because I think it's so deeply ingrained in our lexicon at this point and how we move through the world. We are very much in an internet age. And I think it's almost a commentary on how quickly we rifle through pop culture and things like that. And so in some ways, I kind of like to play with that where it is just a snapshot of that moment in time when a piece was written or created, but also how this just super fast-paced age of the internet and social media and all of these things can really be detrimental to our ability to like connect person to person, and this kind of sense of loneliness and isolation where we have access to, the thoughts and opinions and words of more people than we ever had across the globe. And it can feel so lonely to kind of be in that as well. So I find all that very interesting. And I also find it interesting how we as people seem to believe we have a right to access of people now more so than ever. And we need to know their thoughts and beliefs and feelings on everything that happens and comes out. And everybody kind of almost has this like compulsion to like make a statement about every single thing. And I find that really interesting too. Yeah, where there's just all these like parasocial relationships that exist, and then how that plays into our ability to form romantic relationships and even if familial or platonic relationships with other people. And then outside of that, I think my books in general, I tend to have a neurodivergent perspective with my characters and disability rep, and then also queer rep. And I think that, yeah, I'm just excited. I don't know where it fits, to be honest. I try not to think about it too much or I get really panicked. But I do just know that I feel very privileged to have the opportunity to write in those spaces and from those perspectives and hopefully connect with other people in those communities.
I would call myself a throwback, like both to kind of what the rom-coms I came up on, like the Sophie Kinsella and the Bridget Jones Diary era. And also like if you were going to Venn diagram it, and you had your romance circle and your comedy circle, like I'd be way over onto the comedy side, like out on the farcical edge of it, where it's leading into the screwball and the slapstick. And particularly with these books, because they are like trying to recreate the experience on the page of what those 1940s movies were, because those are something that I still consider like the height of sophisticated entertainment for grown-ups. And I particularly love that vision, that I took watching those like with my mother when I was a little kid of like, this is what it means to be an adult woman. And you can be smart and you can be sophisticated and you can wear the most amazing bias cut satin gown, but still silly. And you can be a romantic object and you can be, somebody's like romantic ideal, even if you are really strong and fast talking and wisecracking, and you still get to dance and you still get to, maybe you're throwing a pie one moment, but the next one you're like, doing the foxtrot while the big band plays and stuff like that. So yeah, there's a wish fulfillment aspect, but I am definitely, if you were picking up one of my books for the first time, like, fair warning, caveat emptor, like they're going to be silly. So we're bringing silly back.
May silly never leave. I relate to it heavily. So we're going to switch over to questions from the audience. And the first one is going to be, do you have any hot takes about particular romance tropes? Does anyone have? Otherwise, I'm going to pick one of you. So go ahead, Maisie.
I think the hate for the miscommunication trope, like everybody just needs to look in the mirror. Like we all communicate. Like, what are you talking about? I don't even think it's a trope. I think it's just like a human condition. It's like, it's not a trope. Like, and it's not like a plot point. Like, we all miscommunicate constantly. And so to me, I think that people just need to realize that they are all miscommunicators and allow us to just kind of reflect back this human experience. And I will die on that hill.
I don't know if this is a spicy take clearly. I suppose it is in a way because it makes a generalization. But I feel that romance readers are generally much, much harsher on female leads than they are on male leads. And I think we should stop. Because I genuinely think, just looking at kind of reviews, it's always much, much more critical, I feel, of the female lead than male lead. And, it's this reproduction of a kind of societal tendency to indulge men and kind of let them get away with things and be much harsher on women. And I get it, because actually a lot of the time you're kind of placing yourself, if you're a female reader of MF romance, you're placing yourself in the position of the woman. And it's obviously frustrating if she's acting in a way that would frustrate you about yourself. And sometimes some things just cut a bit too close to the bone, speaking of the miscommunication trope. But I do feel it's a real thing.
Word up to both of you. Those were deeply cathartic responses, and I'm going to carry them in my heart. So thank you.
No one's harsher on an FMC than an FMR reader.
And yeah, I want to echo what Mazey and Zen say, because we encounter this a lot in our podcast and getting listener feedback to books that we cover. Miscommunication causes angst, and sometimes you want that angst in your storytelling, but nobody wants to live that angst because they have to live it every day in their life. And I've heard people say, I'm reading to escape the miscommunication in my life. Don't put miscommunication on the page. But I think, to Mazey's point, it's part of the human condition. So I appreciate the realness of your responses. Another question that we received from our audience: sometimes people assume that serious books are literary and that funny books are light/lack depth. What do you see is the literary value in humor?
It's a great question.
I think it's really easy to write sad. I think it's really easy to write trauma porn. I think it's hard to sustain even just romance as a whole. Like, I think it's actually very, very difficult to sustain romantic tension and emotional vulnerability, for 300 plus pages through a story, and also make it feel fresh and different for every couple. In my perspective, it does not take as much work to tap into sadness, but to evoke laughter or, brightness or romance or all of those things. To me, that has so much merit. And I think every feeling in human experience in the spectrum of life has value. We just tend to devalue the good feelings because we want everybody to stay miserable, sad. I don't know.
I mean, I think that's so true. And I think, as you say, like evoking sad feelings, like those tend to be universal things. So it's easy to lean into sentimentality. It's like, oh no, the dog is sick, whatever. And it's like, we're all going to be like, oh no, a tear. And humor it's surprising. Like there's an element of anarchy to it. Like you have to stretch, you have to push. There's originality that happens there. And like in both of your books, like if I can briefly shout out, like the voice texting in the shower scene with the Antichrist, in Mazey's book. And I was like, oh yeah, like that was a moment where I was like startled into a guffaw, which was like problematic because I was reading on the couch next to my husband while he was trying to seriously listen to his jazz LP. Oops, my bad. And then like Zen, in your book, there's a moment in Charles's narration is very funny. Like the way he describes the world. And when he meets, he's introduced to the friend group and he's like, now I know how it felt to be like the lowest keeper at Jurassic Park, like in the Velociraptor cage. And I was like, oh my God, that's such a great line. Like I'll probably remember that for the next decade.
Thank you. Yeah, I was thinking when you guys were talking about how in a way it's easier to get an audience reaction by talking about like something sad about them. Do you see that AI written story that Sam Altman was like really impressed by. And I think it's published in The Guardian or something like that. There was a kind of piece of AI creative writing, and it was on the nature of grief. It's like a meta piece about grief. And literally, I think the prompt was write a meta piece about grief. And people were like wildly impressed by it, not least because it contained the phrase a democracy of ghosts, which is a really good phrase, obviously, but turned out to have been lifted from Vladimir Nabokov. And if I could just plagiarize Nabokov, everyone would think I was a genius too. But somehow it's okay when AI does it, but not when I do it. But you know, the thing that struck me about it when I was reading, because you know, I was hearing from kind of proper writers who were saying, "Oh, this is really good. I'm really scared now," and I didn't think it was that good. But in a way, it's easier to fake being good if you're doing like a meta piece about grief, because it can just be kind of clever, you know, because you're talking about grief, it sort of automatically sounds deep. Whereas I think it to kind of draw out from a kind of quotidian moment or to represent in earnest, I think, kind of romance can be quite challenging. There's kind of an interesting question in the chat about, which was directed to me, about kind of K-dramas and romance. You know, what do you think it is about a lot of East Asian dramas that capture romance in such a unique way? I think one thing that K-dramas and other Asian dramas do well is that they are very earnest about romance. There's a real belief in romance. You know, that's not any kind of like undermining kind of wink. You know, this is a bit over the top, isn't it? Or whatever. It's like full on, you know, this is super, super romantic. We're going to lean into that. And that really works. And I think that's something embarrassing about that, right? For a society that is kind of uncomfortable with feelings, that kind of dismisses romance and sex as kind of, you know, things that are like somehow like properties of women, and women are unimportant, as we all know. I think there's something there about that for sure.
Yeah, good point with AI. There's just sometimes like I'll read these funny scenes and AI could never. Like that's just such a human experience. So we have one last question, and I love this because there's a lot of new authors out there, but what is something you wish you knew as a new author? And you know what? Amanda. Here it is. How about you go?
I wish I had known to keep writing and write something new instead of thinking like, you know what, I think on draft 487, I'm absolutely going to nail this portal fantasy adult rom-com that I'm writing 15 years before its time that no one is ready for or wants. Yeah, and I even had like smarter, more experienced writer friends are like, write something else, write a new thing. You're going to learn something writing that, and that you're going to take back to writing this old thing. It doesn't mean you're giving up. But I think I had this idea that like, no, I must persevere and I will never give up on this one precious angel baby manuscript.
Yeah, I think that hanging all your validation as a writer on one project, you know, and also not concluding from any one rejection or any one response. So that's, you know, that's the judgment. I think people who are starting out often have this feeling like they need someone to kind of almost give them permission, or someone to give them some sort of promise, a promise that if I kind of submit to the kind of torture of, you know, writing and having to fill these empty pages with words, it will get published or I will be recognized. And the problem with that is that when the reverse inevitably happens, because everyone gets rejected, then you take that as a big comment on like you as a writer. It's like, oh, I'm not meant to make it. I'm not meant to be published. All this kind of like beliefs get reinforced. When actually it's just one of these things that rejection happens to literally everyone. That is just a fact of life. So I think not taking any one kind of response to any one project, don't hang your identity as a writer on it. You know, it's much better to kind of build your identity around, you know, somebody who's kind of trying different things, and you're trying to learn more, you know, develop your craft, and you are a writer as long as you write. It doesn't really matter what happens in the publishing side. I think probably what I would have appreciated knowing as a kind of early writer is a couple of things. Firstly, that writing novels does get easier. It does. And then because actually it turns out if you practice, you do get better at it. The problem with writing a novel takes so long. It actually takes years and years before you start noticing it gets easier. The other thing is, and it's slightly different from Amanda's, but it doesn't contradict Amanda's, which is that revision is part of the process. So rewriting is writing. So I definitely had a thing where if I'd written something and, you know, someone told me, oh, you need to revise this, I'd have this kind of internal collapse and be like, oh, I'm no good, and this is no good, it's a piece of shit, and so on. And actually, it's just part of the process. Rewriting is part of the process.
Yeah, those were very eloquent answers. For what it's worth, it has not gotten any easier for me at this point. I think I'm on book like 8 or 9, and I'm still like, what the fuck? So yeah, but practice does help, I'm sure. I got a piece of advice from Helen Wong when my book got picked up. And it's something I've carried with me through like every step of the way about how crucial it is to protect your joy and love of writing, because this process of sharing your work, of kind of working on it and putting, so much love into it. And then there's this sense of almost like mourning where when you release it to the world, it no longer belongs to you, but it belongs to the interpretation of the people that read it. And so protecting the joy of the process and why you do that and why you write and sit down and kind of labor over words and emotions and things like that is so crucial to longevity, and also just helps kind of battle against the rejection that Zen was discussing, because that does happen so much. And I think the other thing that's really important, and this is something that I don't know that it will feel second nature or I'll fully grasp, but it's an important reminder that the only thing that you can control is the work itself and what you put onto a page and what the story is. You cannot control if somebody likes it. You can't control how it's perceived or how it's interpreted. You can only control what you put on that page. And so, even with marketing or what publishers do with it, or if it finds readers, if it doesn't, none of that's your business, none of that's your job, and none of that is within your control. And so it's very important to know that ahead of time, that the only thing that you can do is really focus on the words that you want to put on the page.
That's incredible. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Amanda, Zen, and Mazey. You guys were amazing, and I know I learned something to take away from my own writing from this discussion. We want to honor your time. We know that we're a little bit over, so thank you so much to each of you, and thank you to In Bloom Bookery for hosting this event, and we hope to see you all soon. Bye.
Yeah, bye. AG1 Next Gen is a daily health drink clinically shown to support gut health and fill in common nutrient gaps.
What I love about AG1 is the live probiotics that are in the drink, in addition to the 75 plus minerals and vitamins. I've tried the probiotic pills and it just doesn't work for me.
You are a probiotic girl.
I try so hard.
My favorite part about AG1 Next Gen is the fact that they have multiple gold standard clinical trials. In an industry where not everyone invests heavily on research, AG1 Next Gen goes to great lengths to continually invest in rigorous peer-reviewed clinical trials.
Not only does AG1 support gut health, it also boosts energy, provides daily nutrients, and supports your immune system. Head to drinkag1.com/BookTok to get a free welcome kit, including a bottle of vitamin D and free AG1 travel packs when you first subscribe.
That's drinkag1.com/BookTok. BookTalk. One of the things I really wish is that as a kid, I was taught healthy money habits. And luckily with Acorns Early, you can teach your kids those healthy habits.
Acorns Early is the smart debit card and money app that grows kids' money skills as they grow up. Start with the In-Chore Apps tracker and teach your kids the value of $1. Also, the satisfaction of crossing off a chore.
Then you let your kids start their own savings goals. The amount of toys I would have bought myself as a child if I had this.
Kids can spend what they've earned with their own customizable debit card, giving them that extra sense of independence.
I think giving kids that level of independence is so important.
I completely agree. Because if they don't learn it now, they're going to have to learn it with higher stakes later in life, which my parents didn't do with me. Plus, with Acorns Early's spending limits and real-time spend notifications, parents always stay in control.
This is honestly one of the most genius apps, and I can't wait to be able to use it with my kids.
I wish I had kids just so I could use this.
You're going to make sure my kids are going to use this.
That's right. Ready to teach your kids the smart way to earn, save, and spend?
Get your first month on us when you head to acornsearly.com/BookTalk or download the Acorns Early app.
That's 1 month free when you sign up at acornsearly.com/BookTalk. BookTalk.
Acorns Early Card is issued by Community Federal Savings Bank. Member FDIC. Pursuant to license by MasterCard International. Free trial for new subscribers only. Subscription fee starting from $5 per month unless canceled. Terms apply at acornsearly.com/earlyterms.